Good morning, everyone. You're listening to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. This is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor, joined in the WXIR studios by my good friend and co-host, Matt Treadwell.
Good morning.
On today, well, I should first say that today is Saturday, September 26th. So if that is also the date that you are in right now, we're live then. So Saturday, September 26th, 2020. That means we'd love to hear from you throughout the hour by giving us a call in studio, 585-219-8889. What might you want to call in about? Well, on today's show, we'll be talking about a report recently released by the RAND Corporation. They're kind of a non-profit research-based institution. I don't know why they call themselves corporation, but they came out with a report last week that details how basically the bottom 90% of income earners in the United States, so the vast majority of Americans, have had their incomes not grow to the same rate that our overall economy has grown. This has gone on, the authors say, since around the 1970s, so the past 40 to 50 years. And if our incomes, again, for the vast majority of Americans, the bottom 90% of income earners, if our incomes had grown commensurate with the overall economic growth, we would essentially have 67% more total income for the bottom 90% of all income earners. This is around $2.5 trillion. Instead of the median income being where it is today, it would be around, it would be around 30% higher. We'll get to that later on and delve more into the numbers, but long story short, we're going to talk about the report. We're going to look at what the RAND Corporation found. Why is it that our incomes have not risen in alignment with the growth of the economy, and what could be the potential causes for that? Although the authors of the report do not speculate on the causes, they just look at sort of, what has happened. Matt and I might be able to fill in some blanks, being Rochester's premier economic pundits.
God help us.
Well, why I'm being tongue-in-cheek here is because for those who have listened to Evidence of Design in the past, our show, you know that our show is all about critiquing income and wealth inequality. We investigate the causes of economic inequality and examine its effects. Overall, we argue why our society is so economically unequal today is because of rampant, what we would call neoliberal capitalism. This means that for too long, our policy leaders on both sides of the aisle, but largely on the conservative side of the aisle, have argued that the best way to run society is to have society run in the image of the free market. Have an unfettered free market, get government out of people's lives, and make it so that all aspects of our life operate in the image of the free market. Buy and sell, supply and demand, consume and produce, etc., etc., etc. And so we have now valued money more than human lives. Our show critiques that ideology and tries to uncover, where it came from, its causes, and its effects. We'd love to hear from you throughout the hour with your thoughts on, where we stand with economic inequality today, or anything else that's on your mind. Of course, in the backdrop of all of this are protests going on locally and nationally. I think that there can be a through line that connects with the Black Lives Matter movement and, arguments for police reform to economic inequality as well. And I think just as an example, there's plenty, but, local organizer Ashley Gant has repeatedly said, our society is working in the interests of the Walmarts and the Wegmans and not normal everyday people. And so I think there's a lot to be said there as well. We would love to hear what your thoughts are by giving us a call. Again, 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. So we will be talking about the RAND Corporation report that was recently released on economic inequality. And then later on, Matt, we cannot leave this hour without hearing about the Supreme Court and how, we would never see this day coming, how the Republicans are reversing themselves on their 2016 decision not to take up President Barack Obama's Supreme Court nomination for Merrick Garland. They said never, a lame duck president, meaning a president who will be leaving office at the end of the year, should not be able to nominate a Supreme Court justice. Well, shoot. Look what's happening now with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away last week, and Republicans are now trying to fast line Trump's third Supreme Court nominee through the system with less than 2 months until the election. Boy, oh boy.
Barely a month.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's literally less than 2 months, whereas Obama had, 9 months. So we'll hear clips from Lindsey Graham, of all people, someone with a moral compass that I'm sure we all endeavor to follow, my voice dripping with sarcasm. But we'll get to that right after a short break here on 100.9 FM, WXIR. Stay tuned.
I've Been Waiting for You, written by Neil Young and performed by Pixies.
And this is Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. Matt, this past week, the RAND Corporation, again, they're kind of a nonprofit institution that does a lot of research and publish articles and things like that. This past week, the RAND Corporation came out with a working paper, actually. It's not yet peer-reviewed or published, but it's a working paper, came out in September this month, and it's called Trends in Income from 1975 to 2018. It's by Carter Price and Catherine Edwards. Again, RAND Corporation, Trends in Income from 1975 to 2018. You can find that if you Google it. And so in this paper, the RAND Corporation describes how had income continued to grow alongside overall economic growth at the same rate, then the bottom 90% of the American working population would now have 67% more income, totaling at $2.5 trillion. So normally in sort of capitalist logic, if economic growth happens, then income growth should happen too, because there's more money in circulation and kind of the piece of the pie is not, it's getting larger overall, and therefore when productivity increases, income should increase as well. The problem that the authors uncover, and that we've covered extensively on the show before, is that our productivity has increased and our economy has increased over the past 40 years, for instance, but our incomes have not kept the same pace. And by our incomes, I mean the incomes of most working Americans. The incomes for people who are at the very, very top of our income and, our economic distribution, the top 10%, say, the top 1%, say, their incomes have exploded. And the vast majority of, economic gains in both income and wealth have gone to the wealthiest of Americans at the expense of, off of the backs of the vast majority of Americans. And so, again, the authors of this report do not speculate as to why this is happening, but will go into more of what they found with their data. And so just to kind of point out, it's really quite interesting if we think about economic measures and how we measure, our so-called productivity or income or wealth, is that these are relatively new measurements in society. They're only around like 300 years old that can be traced to kind of modern measures because, now that most nation states in the world are capitalist societies with, private property and income taxes and things like that, there's new ways to measure a nation's overall productivity and a nation's individual distribution of income and wealth. And so there's been really an explosion in academia and also in public consciousness when it comes to how income and wealth is measured over the past, 10 or so plus years. And in that research, a lot of folks have really uncovered like, oh my gosh, we are incredibly unequal. as a society. We are mirroring inequality seen, back right before the Great Depression, back in the time with the robber barons and monopolies and trusts and so on and so forth. And so just kind of as a backdrop, there's sort of new research coming out all the time, getting a better handle on how this stuff works.
Sort of going off that, this article, although it's called
Trends in Income
from 1975 to 2018, it does also look at the 3 decades leading up to 1970 and sort of contrast that with the following 5 decades. So one of the things they found, something that I think a lot of people have been aware of for a while now, but something that this article or this paper also corroborates is that in the 3 decades following World War II, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, income inequality actually went down. In the 1960s especially, the most income growth was seen by the bottom quintile, the lowest 20% earners in the U.S., which I think most people would agree is a good thing. I mean, the poor reaping the most benefits, of income, of gross domestic product growth, that and thus shrinking the gap and improving the standard of living for the lowest class members of society. I think that most people would say, yeah, that's great.
Right. So there have been periods of time in American history where, economic growth has been more equal and less equal. And in the periods following World War II, as you've mentioned, Matt, our incomes rose at similar rates across the economic distribution. So a lot of times when you study economic inequality, the population is split into what you just named as quintiles. Quints meaning 5. And so, you have the bottom 20% of income earners, then you have the 20 to 40%, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, and then 80 to 100 respectively. A lot of times, the top 20% is compared to the bottom 20%, or you can look right at the middle, the 40 to 60%. It's just a way, again, as I'm talking about new ways and better statistical methods to measure economic inequality, different ways to compare and look at how our society is doing on economic terms. And so while you are splitting the population up into 5 different quintiles, so percentage groups of 20% of the population, in theory, if the overall economy grows, then if those 5 quintiles grow at the same rate, if the income going to those same 5 quintiles grows at the same rate, then economic inequality stays, the overall economic equality stays the same, because no one is kind of gaining more income over another group. You mentioned, Matt, how in the 60s, for instance, the income group that experienced the most economic growth was the lower income groups, the lower quintiles. That means that economic inequality decreased because people are now kind of closing in, at least the lowest income earners are closing in on the higher income earners. They're still overall the lowest income earners, right? In a capitalist society, and for measurement purposes, you can always split people into 5 different groups so long as people are making different amounts of money. It just depends on how large those groups are apart, And so I hope we're not losing anyone here with the math or the conceptualization. But the problem is, from the 1970s until the present, still ongoing to this very day, on Saturday, September 26th, 2020, is that the higher income earners, the highest quintile, the highest decile, meaning the highest 10%, or the highest percentage point, the 1%, has been pulling and pulling and pulling away from all the other parts of society. They're beginning a greater and greater and greater share of all income and wealth. And so the authors of this RAND report, again called Trends in Income from 1975 to 2018, say in their reports, they're measuring, okay, so there was a period of time in America from 1945 to, say, 1975 when incomes in the United States grew either equally or the inequality actually shrunk because the lower earners actually started to close ranks and gain more income than the upper earners. And Matt, I would agree with you. I think that's a good thing for a number of reasons. The authors of this report then wonder, what happens if we had that same rate of income growth for the lower and middle income earners in the U.S.? What would happen over the past 40 years if we had that same more equitable growth as opposed to the one that we see today? Well, again, the authors conclude that most Americans, again, the bottom 90% of earners in the United States, so 90% goes all the way from the very bottom income earner to someone who makes a whole heck of a lot of money. We would see $2.5 more trillion in income and have, again, 67% higher income than we do today.
And that's $2.5 trillion per year.
I'm not sure. Overall, the 67% more income overall, and so that's a big point, And so where are income growth rates similar to a more equal place? So it's not like, the 40s through the 1945 to 1975 is the halcyon days in American society and that we figured it all out then. It's just saying, hey, back then we were at least seeing positive trends in our economy. What would happen now if we were seeing those same positive trends? Again, unfortunately, over the past 50 years, we haven't seen those at all. And in fact, we only continue to see a more pulling apart. Just a reminder for folks, though, that we are talking about the RAND Corporation report released last week detailing trends in income over the past 40 to 50 years. You can let us know what you think about this by giving us a call at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. You're listening to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, Rochester's extreme independent radio station. Going off more findings from this RAND Corporation report, Matt, the authors write that incomes from both labor and capital have increasingly been concentrated at the top of our income distribution over the past 4 decades. These are incomes both pre-tax and post-tax. I wanted to find a few terms there. I
was right. It is $2.5 trillion annually.
Per year, yeah. So that matters. $2.5 trillion per year is that's important. That's a lot of money per year, especially when our overall GDP is 20 trillion or something. I don't know, but So there would be a lot more money going to
for the bottom 90% of Americans.
Yeah,
the bottom 90% of Americans would be bringing home $2.5 trillion more dollars per year.
Right. That would fundamentally alter our way of life. Literally a fundamental different reality that we would live in, were more money going to the bottom 90% of American workers. And so to define some terms, when the authors write that more and more of the growth from incomes of labor and capital are going to the top income earners, well, labor and capital are kind of Marxist terms here, and they're reference points used to examine how capitalist society works. Labor simply means money you get from working. Capital simply means money you get from owning stuff. In a nutshell, the vast majority of Americans only have incomes from labor.
And I believe in the study, what's the
the trends in income?
Well, no, the people who conducted the study, they said that they did not have a system in place to measure the capital of the bottom 90%, but it didn't matter because, as you said, Jason, most people don't earn. I mean, most people who aren't in the 1% don't own any capital worth speaking of. I mean, most people, not all, but a lot of people have houses and cars, and that is a form of capital, but it's not the kind of capital that can be moved around. Like, if you have a car, you typically have one car. If you have a house, you typically have one house. We're not talking about people who own several pieces of property or several different kinds of wealth that they can move around and liquidate and store into offshore bank accounts and not pay taxes.
Yeah, stocks, bonds, corporations, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, the authors of the report write, quote, capital income amounts to 2% of all the income for the bottom 99% of households. And we've spoken on this show before how like capital essentially doesn't matter at all for the vast majority of Americans. When we speak of capital for most Americans, we speak of all you just mentioned, Matt, which is homes and cars. And those are great things, right? They've always been like the realization of the American dream, having your own home, having your own car. And a lot of freedom does come with that. We're not saying that's a bad thing at all. You know, being able to have your own house, being able to have your own form of transportation, that's really phenomenal. The issue is that those, while they provide incredible amounts of sort of liberation for one's personal life.
Independence.
Yeah, independence. They don't transfer the same financial independence. One's house is worth, $100,000. Let's just put a number on it. One's car can be worth $20,000. And the moment you drive it off the lot, it's worth $12,000. That's not something you retire off of, And so really, when we're talking for Americans, the only thing that one cares about is labor. And this is why when we talk about labor rights, labor laws, increasing the minimum wage, that's really, really important stuff, because that's what matters for the vast majority of Americans. When we're talking about the estate tax and capital gains tax and business tax, all you're talking about is stuff that benefits the 1% and capital owners. And so, Karl Marx would write that there is a fundamental at oddsness between labor and capital, and I think that's true, where capital always seeks to accumulate as much profit as possible for its own ends, and capital accumulates profit for its own ends at the expense of labor. The fundamental logic behind capitalism is that labor is never paid the true share of the work that it does, and it's not paid the true share of the work that it does because its profits go to capital, people who are not necessarily doing the laborious work. They could be doing other entrepreneurial labor work, going to meetings, figuring out business decisions, etc., but they're not the ones actually on factory floors, teaching children, building things, stuff like that.
And we're not saying that that stuff doesn't have value, or that those
Right.
people don't deserve to be compensated, or even perhaps compensated more than someone working in a less skilled job. But we are saying that the difference in degree of what these people are earning is wrong.
Yeah, it's become perversely, grotesquely skewed. And, if the only way you can earn, if the only way most Americans get by is from incomes from labor, and if the amount that people get paid over time, if wages have not increased commensurate with inflation or overall economic growth, then therefore, period, end of story, people are falling further and further behind. Unless, for instance, capital gives up some of its share and redistributes, or according to the authors, had a more fair society to distribute $2.5 trillion of income towards the bottom 90% of workers every year, or unless government steps in and creates other things like universal health care, universal basic income, etc., etc. Unless those things happen, then people will continue to fall further and further behind economically and socially and become further disenfranchised throughout society. And capital owners will continue to have more and more political sway as well. It's not just money. It's not just so-called freedom. It's also power. And that's the problem. So let's look at some more examples, specific numbers and examples from this RAND Corporation report. Again, it came out this month, called Trends in Income from 1975 to 2018. You can Google it. It's by Carter Price and Catherine Edwards. Just for one example of how the incomes look now and how they should look, were incomes to rise commensurate with overall economic growth in a way that kind of happened in a more equal time in America from 1945 to 1975. So the authors write that, the median income for adults in the U.S. in 1975 was $26,000. So 1975, $26,000 median income. Right now, the median income for those adults in 2018 is $36,000. So over the past 50 years, the median income has risen by $10,000. Were that income to grow at the same rate that it did in the more egalitarian time in the U.S. between 45 to 75, the median income should be $57,000. So instead of rising just $10,000, it should have risen $30,000. So the rate of income growth at the median was less than 1/3 of the rate of growth in overall GDP. So incomes have risen for the median worker at 1/3 of the rate of overall economic growth. Where then does that other 60% of income go? It's gone to capital. And so this is the fundamental problem. So workers should be making more money today. Well, speaking of capital, speaking of owners of capital, let's continue to talk about just income though. Let's talk about the 99th percentile. So these are the top 99% of income earners in the U.S. In 1975, their income was $162,000 to be in that threshold, right? In 2018, their income rose to $491,000. So it exploded by around $300,000. If their income growth rose if their income growth rose at a rate commensurate with overall economic growth, their income should, quote, only be $353,000 as opposed to $490,000. So they would be making $150,000 less. Whereas the, median income for all adults in the U.S. should have risen $20,000 more. So again, this is kind of showing. I know this is not good for radio. This isn't great radio practice to share a bunch of numbers. But the point is, in a nutshell, that highest income earners, their earners have exploded. We're just talking about income here. We're not even talking about wealth at all, which is a whole nother discussion.
The rate of growth for the 99th percentile was 171% of what it should have been.
Right, 171% of what it should have been.
And the rate of income growth for all adults just earning an income in America was less than 1/3 of what it should have been.
Yeah, just 30%. It gets even worse when you go into the top 1%. Their income grow at higher than 300%.
Right. It just gets even more ridiculous. Like, it's not even like the 99%. It's like after that.
Yeah, the top 1%. Yeah, it really is, it gets confusing with the numbers, but you have to kind of see the charts and graphs and kind of, play it out. You have to have a little bit of math literacy here, which I'm not great with math, but having looking at it over and over and just thinking about it, it's like, it's the same story over and over again, where the higher you go, the more skewed and grotesque the income and wealth growth becomes.
But I think that's such an important point to understand, because when we're talking about income inequality or income and wealth inequality in America, we really are talking about a very small number of people controlling a vast amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of becomes a trope, right? And I worry that it dilutes. When we talk about the 1%, when we talk about Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, I know it sounds like a trope, but that actually really is literally part of the problem. Like, there are a handful of people controlling a whole heck of a lot of stuff.
And it can sound like we're just complaining about the same people over and over again, but the reason why we know their names and are complaining about the same people over and over again is because it's literally just them. Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty more people than, Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. There's hundreds of billionaires, and so on and so forth. And that's part of the problem. People you've never heard of. People who own different corporations that you sure as heck have heard of, And so, if you follow the breadcrumb trail, you uncover these people, and also millionaires too. Again, Matt and I are not faulting. We're not inherently faulting people for having a lot of money. We're inherently faulting the system that has allowed them to have that much money.
Well, and then they influence the system.
Right. And then we think you can fault those people once they then take advantage of the system that has granted them the money they have, and they try to perverse the system to make it seem like they deserve the money they have and try to make it so that other people can't get to where they got to out of luck. So, that's when kind of fault comes into it. But it's not just, this is unfair. It's these people end up influencing the overall political economic structure to disenfranchise the vast majority of America so that they can entrench their own power and interests. This is why the richest, most powerful country in the world is doing like the least amount of any other country in the world when it comes to climate change, because the people, these millionaires and billionaires who have a lot to gain from not taking action on climate change don't want it to happen. And therefore, they come up with really savvy PR campaigns over the past several decades to hoodwink a bunch of low-income Americans to believe that climate change doesn't exist. And now climate change has become a political issue in the United States when it should be an empirical issue, meaning one that's based on facts and science. It's only become a political issue because these millionaires and billionaires, thinking oil and gas executives, don't want any action to be taken on it so they can continue to be what they are, millionaires and billionaires, because of their destruction of the planet. And so, that's a great example of how where it's not just, wah, this is unfair, let's whine about it. It literally affects people's lives. And, people knowingly make poor decisions so that they can continue to have the power that they have. And, this is the idea of Matt and I, and we'd love to hear from you as well, though, by giving us a call at 585-219-8889. That's 585-219-8889. You're listening to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. Matt, I want to bring in a brief overview of how race and gender plays into the income distribution as well. We've talked overall kind of in aggregate about, different shares of the population. We talked about the bottom 90% of income earners. We've talked about the 99th percentile of income earners, the top 1% of income earners. And we've sort of shared the findings of this RAND report so far that says, the vast majority of Americans have not had incomes grow in line with economic growth. We should all be making $2.5 trillion more a year or having 67% overall higher incomes.
I would love to be making $2.5 trillion more per year.
Yeah, as an aggregate, of course, not per individual. And so we've been talking about that, whereas income growth has exploded for the top earners. Well, let's bring in different analyses to this, such as gender and race. This is really interesting. There's a lot to this. There's 30 pages in the report about this. We're not going to get to the nitty-gritty, but overall, what's really interesting in the findings is that since 1975-ish, so over the past 50 years, white men's income has essentially remained flat or, in fact, decreased. White men's income has essentially remained flat or decreased. On the other hand, women's income has dramatically increased.
Yet they still don't make the same as men.
Yet, of course, right, white men still overall, as a share, make more than women do.
So the gender gap decreased, however, it still exists.
Yes. So gender gap has closed, but it still exists. And so,
according to the study.
Yeah, and we know this from, it's not just the RAND Corporation coming up. We know, women have entered the workforce in the 70s. They have fought rightfully and continue to fight for equal pay, for equal work. That's still not a reality. Men continue to make more than women for no reason other than being a man. And so that's unfair. But again, looking at this from different angles, white men's income has essentially remained flat over the past 50 years, if not decreased, whereas women's income have increased and closed the gender gap a little bit, but it still very much is there. Let's talk about race. Black men and women had incomes increase overall more than white men over the past 50 years, but it's still not by a whole heck of a lot, and white men and white women still make more than black men and black women, and overall, white wealth and income is still ridiculously higher than black income and wealth, for no other reason than someone's color of their skin. And so again, we're seeing trends where the gender gap is closing, where the racial gap is closing, but, the hierarchies still remain where white men still make more than women and their colored counterparts.
And these figures are excluding the top 5% of income earners?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, Matt, where the gaps all close except when it comes to the wealthiest of individuals in this country. When it comes to let's say the top 5% of income earners, white men experienced dramatically higher income growth than any of their other counterparts, and even their other white counterparts lower on the economic scale.
I don't have the figures to back this up, but I would be willing to put forth the idea that the reason why the top 5% of income earners, why white men in the top 5% of income earners earn more than black men is because the top 5% of income earners happen to mostly be white men.
Exactly. And so, the authors of this report don't go into that, but it's true that the wealthiest of individuals in our society happen to be white men, across all levels of society, but particularly of those of the capitalist class. White men control the means of production for the most part. And so the wealthiest of white men in our country have pulled away from all other aspects of society, including their other white counterparts. And I think these trends here, seeing the gender gap close slightly, seeing the racial gap close slightly, again, still egregious inequalities exist within all of those. White men are still on top for the economic distribution scale. But I think this narrative of rural conservative white men feeling left behind by an economic system, it's true. Their incomes haven't increased. They're still better off being a white man than a white woman or someone of color, just statistically speaking, because of centuries of prejudice and racial structures in the society. But, this notion that Trump is capitalizing on white male anger, it's just really funny. And that was kind of the theory for why we started evidence of design way back after Trump was elected, was that, wait a second, what just happened here? How did all of these white men end up voting for a billionaire who promised them economic salvation when Trump's billionaire-ness is off of the backs of these white men for being low income to begin with? It's sort of that's why we started this program, to be like, hold on a second, there's a lot of confusing things going on here with people's voting habits. And
vote your interests.
Yes, certainly vote your interests, people, right? It's disgusting. But
I tell you this. If everybody voted their interest, the Republicans would get maybe a few thousand votes.
Yeah. If people actually were, if people actually had, robust historical and economic education, the Republican Party wouldn't exist.
Not as it does.
Not as it does today, right? It's really amazing. It's really amazing. So, we're going to wrap up kind of going into the numbers of this RAND report. Again, this came out this month. It's by the RAND Corporation. It's called Trends in Income from 1975 to 2018. A big part of this show, Evidence of Design, is to investigate the causes and critique the effects of income and wealth inequality. And this paper, I think, contributes valuably to the debate regarding, how we are economically unequal today. It doesn't contribute to where that economic inequality might come from, but that's where we can perhaps step in and argue that it's because of neoliberal capitalism and folks on both sides of the aisle, but particularly the Republican side of the aisle, who have promoted policies over the past several decades to cut taxation, to get government out of the lives of people, to restrict union rights, to restrict working rights, and lower capital gains tax, and make it so that businesses have more and more power, because money matters more than people. And we disagree with that on the show, and we will fight for a society that values humans over money. Again, you can let us know what you think by calling us at 100.9 FM WXIR, Rochester's Extreme Independent Radio, by giving us a call at 585-219-8889, 585-219-8889. Matt, when I talk to people about this, let me brief roadmap. About 8 more minutes here. I want to talk about why we need government in the economy, and then the last 5 to 6 minutes on the show, we'll talk about the Supreme Court and hear from the insane hypocrisies coming out of the Republican Party today. When I talk about economic inequality with a lot of people, oftentimes I get a response that, if they perceive me as being socialist or, heaven forbid, communist, which, I don't care. Call me a socialist, great. If me being socialist means I want you to have guaranteed health care, income, and housing, then I'm happy to be a socialist. I'm happy to fight for you having a better life, So when I talk to people about this stuff, they always say, well, the government will just take over, that will restrict our freedoms. That's a really low energy argument, and I think
low energy, low energy Jeb.
It's Jeb Bush, low energy. We need government intervention in the economy for a lot of reasons. Let me just share several. First off is the basic issue of workers' rights. If capitalist logic means that it makes sense for people to make more money, and if it makes sense for people to make as much money as possible out of whatever ways they need, then that means that labor will be exploited. If that is a logical makes sense-ness of the system to make as much money as possible and in doing so exploit labor, then I think that's a problem. And this is why for centuries people have fought, mainly socialists, by the way, why we have a 40-hour working week and paid vacation and so on and so forth, is because of the socialist movements and workers' rights movements in the United States, these political struggles. If there's no government intervention in the economy to say workers deserve these rights, then it will only make sense for workers to have no rights and for all of us to go back to working 18-hour days in a factory, making zero money and cutting off our limbs with dangerous conditions.
The question I always come back to whenever I sort of find myself in conversation with somebody and they make the point of, or they bring up the idea of, well, if you give the government more power, they're just going to take away all our freedoms. The question I always want to ask them is, what about the current system engenders freedom? What about the current system feels more free? I mean, what about having your health care, your health insurance tied to your employment feels more free than having a guaranteed system? We're living in the most devastating health crisis of the last 100 years, the last century. And more people, as a result of measures taken to combat the pandemic and just the general devastation wrought by it, are losing their jobs and losing access to their health care. And that is devastating to be experiencing in such a horrible pandemic. And so I don't feel like people are really thinking through, I think there's like a failure to really grapple with or imagine what a democratic socialist society looks like when they say things like, it's just going to take away our freedoms.
Yeah, wake up, America. What more perverse system do we have in favor of the capitalist ruling class than to say you only get health care if you have a job that bothers to provide you one? Otherwise, you do not have health care. You are not guaranteed health care. You, as a laborer, will only get health care if you sacrifice your health by performing labor for my interests.
And the contradiction is even more powerful right now in that the safest thing, the healthiest thing to do for many people is to stay home. And so they're caught between this catch-22 of either having to go to work in order to bring food home and pay rent and have access to health care, or not doing that and not risk getting sick, but, not having any money to pay for those basic needs. And that's not a position that I think anybody should be subjected to. I don't think that's something that we as a society should be okay with. I don't think that, and anybody that disagrees, I question, your moral standing here. I question your values.
Yeah, and the counter argument continues with, well, what happens if we provide people guaranteed things? Won't they not want to work? I mean, you having health care doesn't mean you're not going to work. You having health care means you'll be healthier to work. And just because you have health care doesn't mean that you magically have enough money to meet your other basic needs, out of life.
There's always going to be a small percentage of people who are not going to work for a variety of reasons. Either they're not interested in it. More often, I think most people who don't work are just incapable of, because of maybe pre-existing conditions. But the idea that if you just give away things like healthcare, like a guaranteed base income, like housing, that they're just not going to want to work is ridiculous. Because I think as a species, people are looking for meaning in their lives, and one way in which they find that is by working. I mean, not having to work, I think most people would start to go stir crazy. We all have interests that we want to pursue, and those interests, those pursuits have value.
Indeed, and the argument that we'll only ever be productive if we're forced to work is a farce, because again, Matt, as you're saying, people want to work because working is a natural part of the human condition, to like do things with your time, become good at things, and be productive and help other people through your labor. Like I think that's a natural part of being a human being. And so I hear people all the time saying, well, we need labor to be exploited because otherwise we wouldn't be as productive as a society.
Which is just ridiculous because, as we don't have much time to go into this, but we've talked about on the show before how labor is increasingly being automated, and how, robots are doing everything from driving cars to monitoring online chat boards. And so the reality is that we're going to have a labor glut in a few years, if not decades. Yeah,
and that's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I don't think it's a bad thing for the human species to want to liberate ourselves from needing to do things as much as possible. It's okay for the human species to have a goal for us to have more free time. That's not a bad thing. We don't need to have our future where all of us need to work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. It's okay not to have that. We can still work. It just might not be valued by the capitalist economy. But there's plenty of labor out there that people want to be doing right now that would make a demonstrable improvement in people's lives, like volunteerism or art, that people can't do because it doesn't pay them commensurately with the capitalist economy. And so it's okay as a species to say we want to work less, and we have the ability to maintain standards of living through technology and our innovation that allow us to work less and have more free time to focus on other things that make life worth living. So we'll end that discussion on that note there, talking about the RAND Corporation's report, Trends in Income from 1975 to 2018. You're listening to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. Matt, let's end this hour's show by talking about the old U.S. Supreme Court, one of our three co-equal branches of government that is enshrined in our Constitution to look after our interests as a society. Well, gosh darn it, enshrined in that Constitution is the power for the president to nominate someone to fill the seat in the Supreme Court, and
for life,
and also for the Senate to have to vote to approve the nomination. The Republicans in 2016, I will bring this up for the rest of my life, or at least the rest of Mitch McConnell's life, that the Republicans did not
He might outlive you.
He might. The Republicans chose, under Mitch McConnell, not to vote on Barack Obama's nominee. That was Merrick Garland after Antonin Scalia died on the bench. It was unprecedented at the time. It was viewed as highly partisan. I think it was highly partisan. There's no other way to look at it. Mitch McConnell said, we are not going to vote on whoever Barack Obama nominates for the Supreme Court. This happened in February after Scalia died. This is back in 2016.
Even January. I think Scalia died in December of 2015.
Right. And so Obama had 9 or so months to nominate someone for the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell said no. He said the American people should decide who the next Supreme Court judge is, meaning we need to wait after the November election for the American people to choose the next president, who then would choose who the next Supreme Court judge is. Of course, Donald Trump won the presidency, and that's why Neil Gorsuch sits on the Supreme Court, because it should have been Merrick Garland, but instead it was, Neil Gorsuch. We shouldn't be talking about this at all in terms of left versus right if our political institutions actually worked the way they should, meaning we don't need to argue like it's a political football, but here we are, America. We have a broken democracy. Thanks in part to people like Mitch McConnell and, drumroll, Lindsey Graham. Let's hear what Lindsey Graham had to say about this in 2016 when his party, someone on the Judicial Committee, was thinking about not voting in Obama's Supreme Court nominee. Here's what Lindsey Graham had to say in 2016.
Last year of a lame duck president. This is the last year of a lame duck president. And if Ted Cruz or Donald Trump get to be president, they've all asked us not to confirm or take up a selection by President Obama. So if a vacancy occurs in their last year of their first term, guess what? You will use their words against them. I want you to use my words against me. if there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of the first term, you can say Lindsey Graham said, let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make that nomination, and you could use my words against me and you'd be absolutely right.
Okay, Lindsey Graham, I will use your words against you, Lindsey Graham, who says that in the last year of the first term of a Republican president that we should not nominate a Supreme Court justice until the next president happens to be sworn in, whether it's the current president or the next president.
In one clip, I think he made explicit if the primary process had started.
Matt, let's hear that, actually. Let's hear Lindsey Graham continue his amazing, neural processing happening in his prefrontal cortex and whatever lizard brain he happens to have. Let's go to a clip from Lindsey Graham in 2018. Let's hear what he had to say about this again.
If an opening comes in the last year of President Trump's term and the primary process is started, we'll wait till the next election.
That was the clip I was thinking of.
Really, Lindsey Graham? Okay. How come then, over the past 2 months, you and the rest of your inane party has voted to go ahead and nominate someone for the Supreme Court?
The past 2 months? The past week.
I'm sorry, the past week. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm thinking we only have 2 months till the election, the next 2 months. Yeah, so, in the past...
We have a month. It's not even we have 2 months, Jason.
Right.
We have a month.
You're right.
It's October.
It is
like
October.
Days.
So how come you and the rest of your party has vowed to go ahead and nominate whoever this person is to the Supreme Court? I don't even care about her name. I don't care what she stands for.
I will tell you why, Jason. It's because there's no such things as standards.
Right.
There's only what I want and what you want. And what I want, being Lindsey Graham, is what you don't want, being, just the general interest of the American people.
Yeah, and this, my friends, is democracy on fire. Because what are we supposed to do to counter this? This is nuclear war writ large in politics. Why should we care whatever the Republican Party has to say ever about anything? Our only goal then, if we adopt the worldview of Lindsey Graham, is, gosh darn it, they must be defeated. Whatever Republicans want to do, screw it. We're not going to do it. We're going to vote against it. We're going to filibuster. We're going to lie. We're going to cheat. We're going to steal. And Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell can be proud to destroy American democracy with their complete lack of morals and integrity and decency. And you know what their counter-argument is? Their counter-argument is, well, you would do it to us too, Democrats. Well, you know what? You've only given Democrats that option now. Not only have you invented that, but you've only given Democrats that option. This is where appeasement no longer becomes an option. This is Hitler in World War II that says, appeasement can't work, we have to go to war. This is it. This is you calling for war because you're not opening the door for any form of appeasement. And it's a sad way to end today's episode, but golly, Americans, November 3rd's coming up. Let's all be registered to vote. That's all I got to say.
Golly.
So let's end today's episode by saying thanks for listening to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. Stay tuned for the Esquire Hour. They come up next, and they put on a great show. Stay tuned for them. I was your host, Jason Taylor, joining the studio with my good friend and co-host, Matt Treadwell.
Golly.
Until next time, be well, be safe, take care.